Right, so Israel has unfortunately resumed hostilities this morning, blaming Hamas for doing so. Hardly breaking news that they blame Hamas, as they never admit to doing anything wrong themselves, of course. But depending on what media outlet you're reading or watching, you'll be given varying reasons for why Israel have done this, all basically blaming Hamas. But both Israel and Hamas agreed to a further ceasefire extension just yesterday, so what changed? Some sources talk of an attack in East Jerusalem, others a rocket attack by Hamas on Israel, others talk about a refusal to release more hostages. So what exactly has happened here? And whose version of events can we trust on this? Right, so the Israel-Gaza ceasefire has sadly ended. If Keir Starmer is currently running around with a grin on his face squealing, "I told you so," it wouldn't be surprising at all to me. But he's still wrong, because our ceasefire is still the only route to a lasting peace and an end to the conflict. He hadn't made the call to make it permanent, just to hope that it would last a bit longer, and then a bit longer, and so it is now over, at least for now. Resumption of hostilities is absolutely a setback here, but diplomacy remains the only way out of this, and the same calls made before that brought about a week of peace need to be made again, so we get a much more long-lasting one, hopefully a permanent one. So why have Israel gone on the attack again then? Oh, well, it's Hamas's fault. The terrorists have fired their tin can rockets at us again, so now we're back to firing back our state-of-the-art US and UK made arsenal at them. There are a few reasons being mainstreamed right now as to the cause of the collapse of the ceasefire, all of whom seem to be peddling the official line being given by the IDF, because they never lie, do they? Honestly, after all the debunkings of the propaganda they've been spewing out in recent weeks, how any supposed journalist worth their salt can type their words, what they say, as some form of factual evidence without blushing, I don't know. But this is what mainstream sources are saying. In this case, Sky News, the narrative being set that Hamas broke the truce, despite Israel having broken the ceasefire agreement on multiple occasions, actually, and Hamas, not choosing to abandon the peace effort, have instead been holding Israel to account. The other day, the ceasefire got extended because Hamas refused to release a batch of hostages until Israel stepped back into line, they having not released women and children they themselves have been holding based on how long they've been held for, as they were supposed to, as per the agreement, and also for sending the IDF around to their families, the families of these said hostages, threatening them if they dared celebrate publicly the return of their loved ones. So there is little reason why the Hamas authorities in Gaza would breach the ceasefire agreement, it would seem, when they've been the ones holding Israel to it. Yet, of course, the IDF is saying that Hamas are the ones that violated the operational pause and fired towards Israeli territory. Now, as always seems to be the case, we've seen no evidence of this, but who knows, perhaps this time they'll produce some. On the other hand, another incident outside of Gaza, this time in the West Bank, would it seems give Israel cause to call Hamas out at least. A shooting in East Jerusalem at a bus stop killing 3 Israelis and injuring 13 has been reported by The Guardian, which a Hamas group have claimed credit for, the al-qassam brigades, who, being Hamas, are based in Gaza, but who do operate cells in the West Bank, apparently. Were they operating under the orders of the Hamas government in Gaza, though? Well, potentially. You can't say no, you can't rule that out until we know otherwise. You see, Israel haven't just been releasing hostages in Gaza, it has to be noted, because for as many as they've released, they've been taking more in the West Bank. In the 7 days that this ceasefire has lasted for, Israel have released 240 hostages, including Ahed Tamimi, who infamously punched the face of an IDF soldier in 2017, which made her an overnight phenomenon and a symbol of the resistance against the occupation. But at the same time they'd released those 240, they had arrested and taken 260 more Palestinians in the West Bank, meaning they now have more Palestinian hostages after the ceasefire than they did before. Now, if that isn't a massive violation of the ceasefire agreement, a complete and utter lack of desire being shown by them to truly engage in a peace process, then I really don't know what does. All of the hostages released were either being held without charge or for the crime of resisting occupation, which of course is their right to do under international law. Not one of the people Israel was holding was a criminal. To me, it is a flagrant attempt to incite Hamas by repeatedly breaching the ceasefire agreement or not meeting the terms of it in good faith, as we saw here. Perhaps the al-qassam brigade attack was directed by Hamas, perhaps it wasn't. It's very hard to tell when these cells very often act independently. I just find it hard to believe, after holding Israel to account on more than one occasion over the last week, that they fall for what I would consider baiting them. Of course, all these possible reasons for the resumption of Israeli hostilities and blame being put on Hamas is coming from media outlets everyone should, especially in this matter, take with a pinch of salt. So let's go and see what one with a better reputation, that has been more reputable on this issue, had to say. Al Jazeera is the Qatari-based media outlet that has been covering much of this story far more factually and honestly, not least because Qatar was the country who actually got this ceasefire in place to begin with. Has simply stated in its coverage of the return to Israel bombing Gaza that the ceasefire had simply ended. The extension to the ceasefire being reported on just yesterday, not ultimately being successful. The deadline therefore then passed and Israel were there bombing again dead on 7 a.m. or 5 a.m. or here in the UK. So at time of writing, they've been at it again for some 5 hours and reports already of some 30 Palestinians having been killed have already come in. They report on what the IDF have said as well, but also what Netanyahu himself has been saying. The reason things fell through was a Hamas decision to not release more hostages, according to him. I would argue, since you were taking more hostages as you were releasing others, they've got every reason to accuse you of infringing on the truce. But Hamas have not yet, at time of writing at least, formally responded to the cessation of the ceasefire. What we do know is where Israel are hitting, or planning to hit, because reports have come in that since attacks on Gaza have resumed this morning, that the IDF are hitting all parts of Gaza. Remember that they sent people to southern Gaza to be safe. They drove them out of northern Gaza, encouraged them to leave. Safe being a relative term, of course, when they targeted convoys of people evacuating to the south, and they have struck southern targets already. Well, now Israel are ordering Gazans to evacuate in the south as well now. Well, where are they going to go then? Leaflet drops in the southern towns of Bani Sahila and Karara in the south of Gaza, near the southeastern border of the Gaza Strip with Israel, are being told to evacuate now as well. Where to? So are people now, having been driven south, now being driven west towards the sea? This isn't what from the river to the sea is supposed to mean, but you can imagine Zionists getting a sick kick out of this kind of a metaphor if this is actually the plan and this is actually what they're doing now. Israel has not acted in good faith throughout this week-long ceasefire agreement. The West didn't condemn that. Hamas held off hostage releases when they broke it, and most media ignored that. Netanyahu now cites that as a reason apparently showing Hamas breaking the ceasefire agreement, which is nonsense. Israel simply isn't used to Hamas being able to look them in the eye on their level and hold them to account directly. Frankly, they pretty much stand alone in that, since everyone else seems to fall over backwards for Israel as they play the victim card over and over. Now Israel is targeting not just the north of Gaza, which they've already laid waste to, but also central Gaza, and now southeastern Gaza is on their hit list. The majority of Gazan people who have already fled south, some 1.8 million of them now, already displaced, now being forced westwards. Israel, by their actions this morning and through the ceasefire, have shown themselves to not be acting in good faith. And if that goes for some in Hamas too, then I condemn them equally too. But by Israeli actions now in the south, and with further warning to evacuate happening there too, Israel, to my mind, have no intent on letting up in their genocide and their ethnic cleansing. They're just ramping it up. If Western powers were committed to peace, they'd have been roasting Israel over this. Instead, last night, Starmeroid drone Steve Reed on Question Time spoke of the West being vindicated. Ceasefire ending this morning says you're wrong, Steve. Well, anyway, he said, Israel's right to defend itself cannot mean a blank check. That has been extended for a number of days so far. In that space, there is the opportunity for more conversation on both sides and pressure from the outside world to stop it. Now, I think there's a vindication in this, of the position taken by President Biden and others in the Western world, who did not say to Israel, you do not have the right to defend yourself, which is what some have said. By getting Israel's ear, they have listened, and there has been this pause. What we need to do now is seize that pause and use that moment to extend it for as long as we possibly can. Well, within 12 hours of you recording that, Steve, on QT, it was over. Nothing has changed in Western narratives whatsoever, and hailing the position of Genocide Joe, of all people, to being vindicated when he's supplying most of the military aid, when we have likely been shipping it to Israel via our RAF base on Cyprus, and that somehow being the reason this ceasefire happened, that's vindication. Your brains are in your arse, man, and at any rate, the ceasefire came about, as aforementioned, because of Qatar. Nothing to do with Biden. The West has been nothing but its usual unhelpful, interfering, pro-Israel self. It's likely only involved anyway because, oh look, oil and gas off the coast of Gaza. And you talk vindication. I'm sure your vindication will come as quite the comfort for the families of the 30 Palestinians already dead at time of writing as the attacks resume, and you still talk of Israel being able to defend itself when it is literally bombing occupied territory. There is no two-state solution in Israel's mind here, not without adequate external pressure and calling out what it is doing to force it in that direction, because that is blatantly not just self-defense what they're doing now, and they won't back down over it without pressure. This is the value of BDS, boycott, divestment and sanctions. This is how apartheid was ended in South Africa. As Israel extend their attack range, calls for that should be louder than ever for that to be stopped. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content up daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where a pro-settler paper, a leaked Ministry of Intelligence document, spelt out Israel's plans for Gaza, going back years. We're seeing it being enacted right here and right now. So we can't say we aren't being warned and haven't been warned. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.